see so many people here. And I'm going to get my teeth straight into something a little bit more technical. The reason for the long-winded title of this talk is really to make the point that there's no single cure for backscatter. People always come, question get asked all the time, and I'm sure Martin gets the same, is, how do I get rid of the backscatter in my pictures? And the mistake is to think there's one cure. The mistake is to think, if I find this magic position for my strobe, suddenly it's all going to be gone. And really what I want to stress in this talk is the key to understanding how to minimize backscatter in your pictures is actually to understand the problem. To properly understand what's causing backscatter. We all know it's the particles in the water. If we can really understand what's causing the problem, then everything makes sense. Every solution I'm going to tell you in this talk, you're going to say, well, of course, that makes sense. But what's the key as a photographer is to be able to react to the conditions and to know how much of a compensation you have to make for the conditions and choose the right solutions for the conditions and the type of picture that you're trying to take. So really, I want just to have a little to think about backscatter. Generally with backscatter, people say, well, all I've got to do is stop my strobe, overlapping with my lens, what my lens is looking through. If I can find that angle, I'll get rid of backscatter. Yes, that's correct, but it's a very simplistic view. And it's much more important to think about this properly in 3 dimensions. A lens, you've got my lovely board drawings here. A lens sees through this cone of water when it's taking a picture, and a strobe illuminates a cone of water. And obviously, we get backscatter in the area, I'm going to try the zapper, in the area that the two overlap. Now obviously in this situation here, the strobe is in completely the wrong place. It's not going to light the subject. If our subject is here, there's no strobe light on it at all. So we have to aim the strobe towards the subject. There's no point feathering your strobes further and further away, putting your strobes on longer and longer arms to get rid of backscatter. Because ultimately you're going to harm the quality of light in your picture. So yes, it's important to aim the strobe so that it's not going too much overlapping with what the lens is looking through. But it's actually more important to make sure that we're getting the quality of light. There's no point going to take a picture of something that's a foot away from you and having your strobes on, a metre either side of the camera. You're going to get awful quality of light, and there's no point taking the picture at all. So yes, feathering the strobe away is good, but we don't want to overdo it. We don't want to put it on too long arms. We'll come on to that in a minute. Where we get backscatter is where these two overlap. And it's not just about the angle, it's about the volume of water. The bigger the volume of water that both the lens is looking through and the strobe is shining through, the more backscatter you will get in your picture. And the easiest way to reduce that volume is to get close. Not only do we reduce the distance this way, because the cones get bigger the further away they are from the lens, if you get close, these cones, this overlap in the cones that both are looking through, is much, much smaller. So as a result, we get a huge amount less backscatter. And this is much more important than moving your strobe around. Getting close makes a massive difference to that volume of water. And everything else, if you keep these cones in mind as we go through some of the solutions in this short talk, they all relate to, if you understand the problem like this, everything makes complete sense. And when I say close, I do mean really, really close. If you want to take clear pictures under Swan HPR, if you can get this close to a tompot, they're always going to be crystal clear, even in yucky viz. This is another example. This picture was actually taken on exactly the same dive as that picture I took of myself 3 or 4 slides ago where you could see my face mask. But this picture is clean and it really hasn't been cleaned up at all in Photoshop. And the key to creating this image was getting really, really close to the subjects. This is actually a picture that my friend Dan, who's in the audience, who's also in this picture, took of me. This is us. Basically, we had to dive, stay in the shadows on this dive because there's this thick algae bloom down below 4 meters. So we spent the dive at 3.5 meters, cruising around, and eventually we found a cuttlefish. We spent time with the cuttlefish till the cuttlefish was completely relaxed around us, and she was just sitting there. She'd come and sit right up against your face mask, and that's what I was playing around with here. We weren't really taking pictures at this point. We were winning over the trust of the subject because it wasn't particularly good conditions. And then once we were able to get this close, then you're able to produce an image like this because the cuttlefish is right on the dome. You're not going to get the backscatter. So really, I guess the first sort of way to take home message of getting rid of backscatter is if you're going to dive in lower visibility conditions, always think of going one lens wider. For example, with a little sculpin, but little fish like this, you'd often think that's a 105 fish, a 100 mil fish. If you think the vis is going to be down, go to the wider lens. but instead of using the 105, in this case I used a 60mm. This is a juvenile sea dragon. It's about the size of a ghost pipefish when they're babies, like this. Normally you'd shoot this to 60. Because the vis was down, I actually shot this with a wide angle zoom, right on the dome, very, very close to the camera. A seahorse, again, another subject you might shoot with a 60. In this case here, in very low vis in France, I shot this with a fisheye on a teleconverter behind a mini dome. But because of that, I was able to shoot it from a couple of centimetres away from the lens and get a very clear picture in reduced visibility conditions. So one lens wider is always a good way to go if you think you're going to be getting bad vis. Obviously, that's a decision you have to make before the dive. The cause of backscatter is strobes. And it's not completely correct, but it's a nice way of remembering it. A great way to halve the amount of backscatter in your pictures is to halve the number of strobes you use. And if you take pictures with just a single strobe, as I've done here, you can still get great lights. It's amazing how many photographers, once they've bought that second strobe, it always stays on the camera, whatever else is going on. If you go down to one strobe, you have a much more manageable light source, and you've got half the backscatter. Not really, but you've got half the backscatter to begin with. That makes things a lot easier. We can also, with the newer cameras, reduce the amount of power we're putting out of those strobes by working at high ISO. I took this picture very early in the morning at ISO 1600. In very murky conditions, you can see the fact that, even though it's shot with a fisheye, both the fins of the diver and the tail of the manatee are actually disappearing into the murk. But because I had the strobes up, very, very little power, just giving a little bit of fill, I'm not really seeing too much in the way of perceptible backscatter. So by getting the ISO up, just using a tiny bit of flash, can really take a clean picture. Perhaps the best way to think about it, though, in low visibility conditions, particularly with wide-angle photography, is not to try and light the whole frame. Just light what you need to. In this case here, rather than blasting the scene with loads of light, as you might do in the tropics, you might say, oh wow, there's a fish or a grouper underneath an overhang. I'm going to fill that all up with light and it's going to look beautiful. In lower visibility conditions, you can't really take shots like that. If you blast loads of light into a scene like this, yes, you might get some nice colour on the rocks, but you're going to have problems with backscatter. So turn the strobes down, expose for the light-coloured seal, and put a lot less strobe light into the picture so that it's the ambient light that's creating a lot of the effect. And you're using the strobe light just to really light the subject in the picture. This also sort of makes sense from a sort of a layout of the picture. In this case here, taken in the kelp forest in Tasmania. I'm only really trying to light this is a draft board shark. I'm only trying to light the shark. The rest of the frame, I'm not lighting at all. So I'm aiming my strobes just to light the subject. And if you're diving in an environment like this, you're going to take lots and lots of vertical pictures with the background being of kelp. So you only need to worry about that foreground at the bottom of the frame. So you can set your lighting up to light that up. And again, you're minimizing the overlap of the cones that we saw at the beginning because we're only lighting the bottom of the frame. Obviously, those solutions only work for certain subject matter. This is a picture taken in a kelp forest in Canada. And in this situation here, the nature of the layout of the picture meant I had to light the whole frame. And this actually is a much more challenging thing to do. So obviously, the previous shots are compromised artistically in that I'm only able to use certain layouts of the frame. In this case here, the image that I wanted in my mind required a lot more work. And in this case here, I actually spent 45 minutes in this area working to get my lighting right, just moving my strobes around, just making small adjustments until I was able to get the quality of light on the subjects I wanted and not light up loads of backscatter. And actually there was 3 or 4 of us on this dive, and we all spent a good half an hour to 40 minutes in this area. And of all of us shooting, that I probably only got 3 or 4 usable pictures and no one else got anything that was particularly usable. Because it was a very tough situation to try and light a big scene like that in relatively low visibility. And obviously the problem of diving in a kelp forest is when you breathe out, it rains down sediment afterwards, so you have to be very careful as you move around. So obviously, with backscatter, it's a case sometimes of balancing the artistic designs you have for the image with the technical constraints of trying to light those pictures. In this case here, I was quite lucky to pull it off. Often, you have to balance those two against each other. And that's particularly true in close-up photography, which I'm going to talk about next.